Hello. Hi, it's Rennie. Welcome back to the podcast slash YouTube channel if you're watching this on video. And for those of you who are new, I'm Rennie. I am diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, and depression. But if you know me and you've listened to any of my previous episodes, you know that I don't actually really like labels. I just understand that that is how we make sense of the world and each other and so forth. And that has been um a big part of me, in my own healing and recovery, has been working through labels and diagnoses and kind of shifting from traditional recovery mental health settings to more untraditional, holistic, spiritual. So I'm someone who has experience navigating all sides of healing, and I just share based on my lived experiences what has helped me create a life that is stable and balanced, although this season of life is still full of all of its ups and downs. I've come very far in my recovery. So today I really want to share just the reality of the deep inner work that's required. And I feel called to share this just because I'm someone who I've really been doing the work and I haven't really taken enough time to commend myself for all that I've learned because I think for a long time I was really hyper focused on my mistakes and what went wrong and what didn't work out, particularly in my relationships. Because I'm someone who's navigating another separation right now. So I've just been reflecting on my role and how do I hold myself accountable. And as I've been doing that, something that came up for me and something that has come up for a lot of my friends who have either really dedicated their life to their healing and self-evolution and self-growth and self-development, or those who, like myself, they're navigating mental health issues or severe mental illnesses or cluster B mental illnesses and so forth. And they are people who consider themselves dedicated to their healing and recovery and to living a life that's balanced and to, doing all the things that's required. And I think a conversation that comes up is how isolating it can be at a certain point because it feels like once you are someone who is consistently and willingly doing the hard work, right? That other people aren't holding themselves accountable. And that's something that I've noticed because as someone who lives with BPD and these more severe illnesses that when I don't take care of it and it's not managed, will wreak havoc on my life and others. I have to be intentional about my healing because I know the harm that I have caused. But I'm also in this season where I feel that I'm stepping into a whole different version of myself that feels comfortable embodying the things that I've learned. And as I'm learning to do that, it's not lost on me how many people are choosing not to do that and how stronger and tighter my boundaries are having to get because of that. And it can feel really lonely and isolating at times because there's, in my opinion, far more people who aren't doing the work, whether they are people who are diagnosed or not, right? Versus those who are. And so once you are someone who's gotten to a certain point in your life where it's like, okay, I know how to hold myself accountable. I know where I need to change, where I need to grow. I know the root causes of a lot of my issues. I know when I'm projecting, you're able to sit with your feelings, you're able to sit with your emotions, and you're able to hold yourself accountable and not only know those things at an intellectual level, but start to integrate them into your day-to-day life, into your relationships, into how you actually show up in the world, like embodiment. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people who choose to not do that, or even if they are people who consider themselves spiritual or dedicated to their own healing and self-growth, they're not actually doing the work. And I want to talk about that today. I want to talk about how you can know that you are actually doing that inner work, or, myself and many others might call it shadow work, but regardless of what resonates with you, is that deep inner work that's required for you to become the best version of yourself. And before I continue, I just want to say that I am someone who believes that healing and growth is a lifelong process. I'll never think that you'll get to a specific destination, but I do think that you can get to a point within your own healing to where you feel like you are consistently embodying the version of yourself that you know that you are capable of being. And it doesn't mean that you won't make mistakes or you won't hurt people or people won't hurt you. That's just part of life. But it's more so now you kind of know how to respond differently. And so that's what I mean when I say you've done the work, right? Because it's an ongoing thing and it's something like we'll consistently be doing, but you have decided to be someone that's dedicated to that work and to actually showing up in that and embodying it. And so I want to just dial it back and talk a little bit about what that inner work, shadow work is. So the way that it's often described is facing the unconscious parts of ourselves or the parts of ourselves that we just avoid, deny, are ashamed of, don't necessarily like. So for me, as someone who was previously diagnosed with bipolar disorder and now diagnosed with BPD, and as someone who has had all these labels thrown my way, autism, complex trauma, all these things, I know that I'm someone who has gone through a lot of profound suffering, especially in my childhood. I have very severe complex trauma. And we know now, if you've done any type of research or if you're at all like um, interested in mental health, then you probably know that childhood trauma in particular and adverse childhood experiences very much impacts your brain, very much impacts how you develop and how you end up responding to the world, your nervous system, all of those things, right? You can go to some of my previous videos and episodes to like learn more about impact of trauma and how that can really um, influence your subconscious mind and how you show up in the world. And for me, because a lot of my trauma, specifically revolved around men, I've experienced sexual abuse, I've experienced physical abuse, verbal abuse, maternal, paternal wounds. So family relationship dynamics are something that's always been really challenging for me. And particularly in my romantic relationships, I was someone who would lash out. I'd have episodes, and because I also experienced a lot of physical abuse, I'm someone who has disassociated a lot, which means I'm like very detached, very out of my body, very ungrounded. And so grounding has been a really big practice for me, especially recently. And learning to feel safe in my body, safe in the world, safe in relationships, safe to be close to other people and to let people in. Um, and for much of my adult life, I was either very disassociated or I was showing up inauthentically or projecting my own pain, like I wasn't really able to see people's experiences or the ways that they would treat me, the ways that they would talk to me. I wasn't really able to see it through the lens of who they are and what they experienced and their level of consciousness and where they're at in their own life's journey. I was only seeing it through the lens of my own experiences, which mostly were negative and painful, right? So it's almost like every relationship, specifically romantic relationship, was like a means to an end. Like it wasn't conscious, but I was someone who became either very codependent, particularly like when I was like pursuing, because I was always someone chasing and pursuing the person because abandonment wounds. Um, it was either I was always kind of pursuing and pushing and very codependent, very clingy, or opposite, super avoidant, just MIA, very detached, and would just discard people. I was someone historically that would just ghost people and disappear. Or I would, be very clingy and just harass people, to be frank, and like not really care for their boundaries because a lot of the ways that I was approaching relationships, particularly with men, were based on a subconscious level, like my own abandonment wounds, and it was a means to an end. It's just like I, for a long time, wasn't aware of it, but I was afraid to be alone. So it's like, okay, I on a subconscious level need someone there for me, and this is like a deep-rooted fear of abandonment and for so long, I wasn't even aware of it, let alone able to like address it. So it's like I would get into these relationships, and then if someone didn't text me back, or if someone didn't show up when I wanted them to show up, or if they didn't respond in a way that made me feel loved, even if from their perspective they were doing it based on their level of awareness and like their own experiences and who they are as a person, right? Even if they felt like they were showing up, if I didn't like it and I found it triggering, that's all that mattered to me. That's all that mattered to me. I wasn't really in relationship with people based on who they are. I was in relationship with people based on what I needed on a subconscious level, which is extractive. And I, I don't want to have transactional relationships, but that's what I was doing for a long time without even being aware of it. And it was throughout my own inner work, shadow work, where, these issues kept coming to the point to where it was like it would get to a place to where it felt like it was beyond repair. Like I would destroy these relationships and I would self-sabotage these relationships, even with people who were trying their hardest to show up for me in the only ways that they knew how, right? Because again, people can only show up for you as far as they've shown up for themselves, and they can only be there for you based on like where they are at with themselves and based on their own level of consciousness and their own values and their own experiences. Like they can't be you. And I feel like a lot of times we're trying to get what we actually need from ourselves from other people, but I digress because that's getting very deep. But I say all this to say you have to come to a point in your healing where you stop reflecting on how everybody else has treated you. And this is not to say like you haven't been mistreated, because as someone who's been abused, I'm not one to say that. I know that there have been a lot of experiences that have been out of my control. And I've also had a lot of relationships with partners who just weren't able to really be there for me. But I've also attracted that. Like I've attracted emotionally unavailable men and people who just they weren't doing the work for themselves, let alone had the capacity to be there for me. And I wasn't doing it for myself either. So I couldn't really expect differently, but I was anyway. So I had to get to a place in my recovery, of course, after coming out of like crisis mode, getting my nervous system a little bit together enough to where I could clearly think, right? You can't do that if you're in a constant state of disassociation. You can't do that if you are in severe fight or flight mode. You need to get regulated, right? And so I have episodes where I talk about that nervous system regulation, some of the tools, right? But where it gets hard in our healing journey is that a lot of people start with like we start to kind of confuse the basics and the tools and the habits with healing. Those are tools. You are the one that's healing yourself. It's not the journaling. It's not the meditation. It's not the grounding practices. It's not the spiritual practices. It's not the prayer. It's not the divination tools. It's not all of these things that we use as a resource, as a tool to help us ground into our bodies, to help us regulate our nervous system, to help us intellectualize and make sense of and understand ourselves, which is important. All of those things are important. As I said, you need to regulate yourself so you can think clearly. And journaling is a great tool for intellectualizing and understanding why you think the way you do, why you respond the way you do, some of the core wounds connected to some of your, pain or the ways that you've chosen to show up that might feel out of alignment or you might feel ashamed of, right? So I'm not saying not to do those things or that those things don't matter, but what I'm saying is I'm finding people are confusing that with actually doing the deep inner work, and that's not what the deep inner work is, right? It's very uncomfortable to go through the process of healing. And I feel like what ends up happening is that we kind of forms these healthy habits and we can at times convince ourselves that we are living a peaceful life when it's, and then we're not happy and we're confused. Like things are still going wrong and we're confused. And it's like, no, you're not actually experiencing a peaceful life. You're still out of alignment in a lot of ways. You've just convinced yourself that because you're not seeing conflict in your life, or because you're not uncomfortable, or because you have these habits that you've healed, that you've done the work. And so I want to share that like shadow work, inner work is not just an aesthetic. It's not just the tools. It's deeper than that. You have to actually face yourself, right? It's not about what's happening in your circumstances around you, because what's happening around you is ultimately a reflection of what's happening within you. But it's not just about the external, it's about what's actually going on inside here. And a lot of us end up distracting ourselves with the tools that were meant to help us deepen our understanding of ourselves and our pain. So it's like, for example, I see a lot of people online who they really highlight their self-care, their healing routines, like journaling in the morning, doing the gratitude, doing the daily meditation, going for a walk, doing the exercising, eating healthy. And again, all of these things are great. All of these things really help you to be able to have more of a clear head, to regulate your nervous system so that you can sit with yourself long enough to really deepen your understanding of what's actually going on in there. But those things alone that does not mean that you're healed. So if you're doing all these things and you're like, okay, what the fuck? I'm still not happy. or there's still things in my life that I feel like are not what I want to be seeing. There's still relationships that are like, why is this happening? Like, there's still things in your life that you're just like, I don't understand because I'm doing all these things. I'm supposed to have a peaceful life. I'm supposed to be experiencing peace. But it's like, have you actually faced yourself? Are you actually doing the work or are you bypassing? Because I feel like a lot of people are bypassing. I'm someone who was doing that for a while. And it was kind of like I had journaled so much and I had intellectual, like I understood myself. So I came to this stage, and I feel like a lot of people I've talked to who are dedicated to their journey have also talked about this, where it's like you get to this point where you are like painfully self-aware. So it's like therapy isn't really helping you now because it's like they're telling you things you already know, right? So let's just say you've done enough healing work to know, okay, these particular patterns in my life, or these particular type of relationships that I'm attracting, or these particular types of things that I think repetitively, they're connected to this particular experience, whether that's childhood trauma, whether that's some really bad relationship experience that you had, or some type of family issue that you have had in the past or currently have, or some type of career issue, whatever it is, right? Like, let's just say you already know what it is. You journal, you sat with yourself, you know what it is, you know why you show up the way you do, right? So it's like you intellectualized it and you understand it. But just because you've intellectualized it and just because you've understood it and just because you've done journaling and like you're self-aware, that does not mean that you've actually processed it or that you are integrating it and embodying it. So can we talk about that? Let's talk about what it actually looks like to do the work and to embody the lessons that you've learned from doing the work. So feeling uncomfortable in the process, right? If you feel extremely comfortable throughout the healing process, I'm sorry, but you're probably not actually doing the work. It's not just meditating and like going out and hiking and just being like, oh, this is so beautiful. Life is so beautiful. And you're like, every time a negative thought comes in, you're like, no, go away. Every time, some type of conflict comes up, you're like, blocked, delete, out of my life. I'm not going to address it. No, you're avoiding. You're not actually doing the work because there are opportunities in those conflicts. There are opportunities in those thoughts that are popping into your head habitually. There are opportunities in any type of resistance in your body, any discomfort that's coming up that you are avoiding and just telling yourself, no, I'm staying positive. I'm just staying positive. That's not doing the work because those things are coming up to tell you something. They're coming up to teach you something about yourself, something you haven't addressed yet. You're avoiding it. And it's not to say that like you should go out and just argue with everybody. This is not to say that. But you can sit with it. Like if there's a particular person in your life that's making you uncomfortable, there's a particular conflict in your life, you don't have to necessarily talk to the person. I'm not telling you to do that, but what I am telling you to do is to address what's coming up. If you're having a negative thought that's recurring coming up, sit with it. It's trying to tell you something. Sit with what that thought is. Journal about it. Reflect on it. And don't just journal about what that person did or like what the external circumstances are. Talk about yourself as well. Like, what is your role in it? How are you showing up in it? How did you show up? How have you responded? Right? You got to sit with any resistance or fear or sadness or anger when it's coming up. Don't avoid it. That's bypassing. It's there to teach you something. And it's only negative, which I personally don't like to see emotions as positive or negative. They're all just there to communicate something to you. It's how you choose to respond that can be perceived, again, all perception, as positive or negative, right? Like if you're angry about something and you go out and you like harm everybody, you chose to do that. It wasn't the anger that did that. It was the choice that you made based on the feeling. And you don't have to respond to the feeling. You don't have to respond to the thoughts, but you can sit with them and you can allow yourself to understand them and not just intellectualize them, right? Move it through your body, right? And then also try to understand why it's coming up. If it's coming up repetitively, it's for a reason. For me, recently, I've had a lot of anger come up, particularly when it comes to family relationships and romantic relationships. I just felt like I've always been let down, always been disappointed. And I did have to sit with my role. I had to sit with, okay, this is how I've caused harm in relationships, but also acknowledge how other people have wronged me. But also, what choices could I make that are different so that I could potentially invite different experiences in, right? Because it's one thing to sit and reflect on it and to be angry about it, which I think is important, to acknowledge it. I feel angry and to not avoid it, like be okay with the fact that you feel the way you feel. But then it got to a certain point where I had to be like, okay, like this keeps coming up. I'm very angry. What do I do about it? And in choosing what to do about it, how can I make choices that are more in line with the person that I want to be versus who I was, right? So maybe in the past, I was angry and I cussed somebody out. Maybe in the past, I was angry and I just had to have my voice heard. So I was blowing up people's phones to make sure my voice was heard because I didn't feel heard, right? It was in me sitting with that and realizing, oh, the issue here is not really what they did, it's the fact that I don't feel heard. That's what you need to be doing. Don't bypass the negative emotions when they come up because they're there to teach you something. And once you really understand it, then you can start to embody the version of yourself who responds differently. It's not just understanding it. Yes, it's great to come to that self-awareness, but then it's like, okay, what do you do with that? Right? I was angry and sad because I felt like there was a lot of things in my life that it just wasn't making me feel good, whether it was romantic relationships, whether it was family dynamics, whether it was career. So I had to sit with that and acknowledge that I feel this way, for one, not distract myself, not bypass it. And then I had to decide, okay, well, the version of myself that I want to be, how would they respond to this? How would they handle this? And then I had to take the necessary actions. Healing is also actions. It's not just understanding things. You have to integrate it into your actual life, right? So then I had to decide, like, okay, I have to switch my career path, or I have to communicate that this isn't working for me and I would like to try something different. Or I have to research alternative options that do feel more in alignment. Or I have to communicate to these particular relatives that this isn't working for me and I have to set boundaries. And I can do that in a way that's loving. I don't have to cuss people out. I don't have to flip out. But I also will say sometimes people do need that. So for the times that I have done that, even though I know and I feel that was out of alignment and I feel like it was wrong, there are some times where I don't regret lashing out on people because I feel like they needed that. There have been times that people have lashed out on me where it's like I needed to hear that. I needed to experience that so that something could click within me and I could get it together. So I'm not one of those people who is all love and light. And, I feel like there is so much that you can learn from the darkness, and there's so much you can learn from those painful experiences. And sometimes people do need to see you in your truth, whether it's comfortable for them or not. And I feel like a lot of women especially are so uncomfortable expressing anger, but that person might need to hear it, and that actually might be a catalyst for change for them. Not that you can ever control other people. Like you might actually plant a seed in their mind that encourages them later down the line to change or to grow or to heal. You might be the only person that makes them aware of something within themselves that might need to shift. So I'm just gonna throw it out there for whoever needs to hear it. If there have been times where you felt like, okay, I lashed out and I regret that, sit with it, reflect on it, but sometimes maybe that person needed that or deserved that. That's all I'm gonna say about that. Some other things to think about when you're reflecting on whether you're actually doing the work is your patterns, okay? And I kind of touched on this. It's, as someone who writes and journals, and I've journaled since elementary school. So for the majority of my life, I'm very self-aware because I've written down all my patterns for so long. It's one thing to write it down and be aware of it, but it's like once you kind of notice a pattern, like I noticed that I was attracting particular types of relationship dynamics. I noticed that I was responding in particular ways when certain triggers were coming up. If I felt abandoned, if I felt unheard, if I felt emotionally neglected, if I felt like invisible or like my feelings didn't matter, right? A lot of really unhealthy patterns would show up where it was either like I would disappear on people, they just would never see me again. I would ghost, disappear, or opposite. I was ever present. They were never going to be able to get rid of me because I wanted to be seen. I wanted to be acknowledged. I wanted to be heard, even at the expense of the other person. I didn't care. There were times where I didn't care, right? And then when I would come to and I would, feel like I was in a more rational healthier, stable set of mind, then I would feel regretful. And then once I felt regretful, I would beat myself up. Then I would kind of enter this depressed spiral of self-loathing and shame, which I think a lot of people with BPD can relate to, of like going through these cycles of like you're splitting and you're lashing out on people, or you're ghosting people, or disappearing on people. And then once you kind of come to this place of like rationale, right, you're kind of out of the split. And for those who don't know what splitting is, it's kind of like all or nothing, black or white, very intense thinking, where it's kind of like, someone hurts you and it's kind of like, oh, they're the worst person in the world. Like that's kind of where your mind goes. It's a defense mechanism. It's definitely like a fight or flight response. And for so long I would do that. And then once I would kind of come to, I would be so remorseful and so ashamed. And then all of that frustration and anger would turn inward. And now I'm self-sabotaging my own life. Now I'm destroying my own, opportunities, and I'm not taking care of myself, and I'm like having these negative thoughts about myself, and I'm beating myself up, which doesn't serve me. And doesn't allow me to then step into who the version of myself that could actually handle this in a better way, right? And so I had to notice that that's what I was doing. I was lashing out and then turning inwards. It was just like either externalizing my pain or internalizing my pain, but the pain itself wasn't being addressed, right? So I had to sit with that. Why are these patterns continuing? And it's more than just journaling, like, okay, so this is how I feel when this person does this, or this is how I feel when this type of circumstance happens. It's more than just the external factors that are influencing your emotions and how you feel, and thus like what your responses are. It's what caused that thought or feeling in the first place. When's the first time you felt that way? Because it was probably, chances are you felt that way before this person. That's not always the case, but chances are this person is just triggering something that's already there. A lot of times that's the case. Not always, but a lot of times people mirror back to us things that we still haven't addressed within ourselves. For me, it was a lot of childhood stuff. Like every man I was going to view through the lens of abuse because I hadn't addressed it. So I was ready to pop off. I was already, my baseline was already high, right? So it's like it doesn't matter how hard they might be trying to be polite or kind or understanding. My baseline is already here because I'm already approaching this from the lens of someone who's been harmed by men. So I already don't trust you. So I already secretly don't like you. So I'm already like having this animosity. I'm ready, like, you don't have to do much, you know? So you have to understand like the root causes of these things. You have to understand what really caused these patterns to form in the first place. This takes a lot of time. This takes a lot of reflection. And if you're someone who's go, 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 distract, 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 you're always scrolling, you're always out with friends, you're always working, you're always exercising, you're not sitting in stillness, you're not sitting with yourself. When these things come up, you're distracting yourself. How are you going to work through these patterns if you're not sitting with yourself long enough to even feel it and to acknowledge it, right? And another thing for me, and another thing I'll just call out in general, is once you start to kind of like notice these patterns and you actively take steps to shift that, right? You will notice that everything starts to change. And oftentimes that's not going to be comfortable. And so you're going to feel like you did something wrong. Now you're questioning yourself, right? And a lot of people I feel like have a hard time with this point in the process is that once you realize that by then changing your responses, that's going to affect your life and it's going to get really uncomfortable. A lot of people backtrack because they're not ready for that. They're not ready for those changes. They're like, oh, wait, 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 wait. No, now I'm uncomfortable. Okay, now I don't want to destroy all my relationships. But in this process, you have to understand that like you will become aware of what is and is not in alignment, and your life will change because it might need to in order for you to become the version of yourself that's genuinely okay, that's genuinely happy, that's in alignment, and that's fulfilled. You're not just pretending, right? We think we have peace, but like that there's a difference between actually having peace and pretending we have peace. Like looking like we have peace from the outside versus feeling fulfilled on the inside on a deep core level. That's going to require a lot of sacrifice. So that might mean that as you are, noticing these patterns and you are shifting your behaviors, like, okay, I notice I do this, so now I'm gonna do this, right? And then the people around you are like, um, what are you doing? And now you're realizing you're having fallouts with friends. Now you're realizing you're having issues with family members. Now you're realizing that relationships are falling through. Now you're debating about your job and your career, and you're like, should I just quit my job? Like, what is going on? And then suddenly you feel like your life is turned upside down. Honestly, that can be a good sign because that means that you are actually now embodying this new version of yourself. And with that, those changes are kind of inevitable. I'm not always saying that like your whole life will be flipped upside down, but you will notice changes. You will notice your relationship dynamics will change. You will notice people will respond differently to you. But the more that you keep showing up in your truth and from these new, healthier responses and patterns and behaviors, now you're able to align with people who align with that version of you, not this version of you. So if you're feeling like, okay, so I love these people, I love these friends, I love these relatives, I appreciate the people I work with, I appreciate these spaces, I've grown comfortable here, but I'm not fulfilled and you're afraid now you're like, oh, I don't want to say anything 'cause I don't want to cause any conflict, I don't want to cause any issues. You're honestly self-sacrificing. You're self-abandoning because you're choosing their comfort or the comfort of the situation at the expense of your own fulfillment. And I'm not saying to be selfish, but I am saying that in order to really step into this newer version of you, this healed version of you that responds differently, you will have to be willing to make some sacrifices. You will have to be willing to let some relationships naturally grow away, grow apart. That's honestly part of life, and it's something that I feel like we don't talk about as much, and I feel like we're very uncomfortable allowing things to grow, allowing ourselves to naturally evolve beyond something. It feels like we're doing something wrong, but it's almost I like to see it as like when you're going through school, when you're in school, like when you're a kid and you're going through school, every year you come back each year, and it's kind of like an expectation that some people will be the same and have the same friend groups, and some people will have changed and evolved, and they might, go to a new friend group. And some of the old groups might be a little bothered by that, and some of them might just be like, whatever, she's friends with those people now, who cares? It's kind of like that. And particularly, I think when we're younger, we have less resistance to it than when we get older. Once we start to form attachments, then we're like, we feel some type of way about it because now we feel like it reflects something about us now. Now we're projecting. Once we get to like high school, that's when we start to really project. But like, if you think about like when you were like in elementary school, at least for me, I don't know, I'm very neurospicy, so I don't know how it is for other people, but at least for me, I was like, okay, cool. Like I didn't think anything of it. I thought that was normal, like we're not in the same class anymore, so like I'm probably gonna be closer to the person that I'm in the class with them now. And I feel like that's how we need to approach life in general throughout life. Like it doesn't have to be negative. It doesn't have to be drama. You can be grateful for the people who are part of your journey, who were there for that version of you, but you're not that anymore. And so now you're gonna have to go with what's in alignment with who you are now. It doesn't have to be a big dramatic thing. It's just part of growing and evolving. Um, but anyway, so to continue, a few other things that I want to touch on. One big thing in particular, and as someone who like collects crystals and all the things, um, I just have to say we gotta stop like thinking that these external things are healing. Just because you got rituals and you got crystals and you got therapy, those are just tools. Again, back to what I said in the beginning, if you're not doing the work, it doesn't matter. I know people who have been in therapy for years. Me personally, that's a red flag for me. If you've been in therapy for years, and you haven't changed, why are you going to therapy? Because now you're just in therapy because that's your sounding board. It makes you feel better to have someone hear you out, but you're not embodying any of the things that are coming up. You're not actually taking that and letting that change you for the better. You're not actually changing your behaviors or responses. You're just going because it makes you feel better to vent, right? Or you pull out your journal, you pull out your crystals. Those things make you feel better temporarily. You meditate, you exercise, you go to the gym, you eat healthy. Those things are great for you. They make you feel better temporarily. You still need to actually do the work. You still need to actually embody the lessons, right? And again, that process won't be comfortable. It's not always going to look pretty. Okay. But how you start to see that you are actually integrating these things is in the little changes that starts to take place in your life. Like now you're noticing you're responding very differently when people slight you. Now you're noticing that you are holding yourself accountable when you make mistakes or when you do something that you know is out of alignment with who you are in this version of life, in this version of yourself. Um, Now you can see all the perspectives, and then you can decide what the best course of action is. Instead of suppressing your emotions like anger or sadness or grief, you actually pause, you breathe, you sit with it, you express it in a healthy way, whether it's through creative outlets, whether it's through movement, somatic movement, but you also take whatever comes up as you are moving through these emotions and you let it change you for the better, right? You don't just focus on the light emotions and just ignore the ones that are uncomfortable. You don't just intellectualize the pain that you're feeling and understand them from a mental perspective. You feel them. When you're sad and heartbroken, you feel it. You cry if you need to cry. But then you decide, what do I do now? And what would this version of myself do? Um, and you don't just go through the checklist of I did this, 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 and this, and this, and this, so I'm healed. You understand that it's deeper than that. You understand that there are deeper core root issues that might need to be addressed. You understand that there might be some things that are uncomfortable that are coming up for a reason, and you don't try to fight it. Um, you learn to embody it slowly with time. It takes time. You might make mistakes, but you give yourself grace, you hold yourself accountable, and you keep moving forward. If you make a mistake, you don't just give up and say, okay, fuck it. Every time I'm mad, I'm just going back to lashing out on people. Who cares, right? I tried and I failed. No, you might make a mistake. You own up to it. You hold yourself accountable for it. You set boundaries if you need to, and then you try again next time. This is what it looks like in practice, right? You let go of the things that aren't working for you anymore, whether it's the job, the relationship, the friendships. It's out of alignment. You know it's out of alignment. You let it go with grace, with love, with gratitude. Or if they are extremely toxic and abusive, you don't have to do that, but you address it within yourself. You don't just avoid it completely. Even if it doesn't mean addressing it directly with the people, you address it within yourself because what did it bring up in you? And a lot of times people mirror back to us things that we don't want to see in ourselves. Like whenever people weren't showing up for me, I kept hyper fixating on why they weren't showing up for me. And in so many ways, I wasn't showing up for myself. And it's not to say that that person not showing up for me was okay or like, put all the blame on myself. I'm not saying to, self internalize in the ways that are like harmful to where now you're just beating yourself up. I'm not saying that, but there's a difference between holding yourself accountable and acknowledging like your own patterns and beating yourself up. You don't have to beat yourself up, but you can say, okay, well, I keep attracting these people who aren't showing up for me. Why do I tolerate that? Why? Why would I tolerate that if I care about myself? What am I gaining by tolerating that? Why am I chasing people who don't want me? What is that bringing up in me? What does that say about me? Why am I lashing out on people? What is it that I actually need? What do I feel like I need? And if they're not able to give it to me, why do I keep trying with that particular person? What is it that I feel like I'm getting from them that I can't get from myself? Like, you got to ask yourself the tough questions. It's not comfortable. It's really uncomfortable. If you find yourself sobbing in a bathroom a couple nights, that's part of it. It's really not that pretty all the time. And we need to be okay with that because ultimately it's those moments that's going to get you to where you actually want to be, to where you actually feel okay. Because I really feel like I'm entering a season of my life where I genuinely feel okay. Like I used to not be someone who could like be alone. Like I would literally be spiraling all the time in my head, all the time ruminating all these negative thoughts. And I dreaded waking up in the morning. And now it's like I'm literally okay. Like I'm literally excited to get up the next day. And there are like these small things that I do that I look forward to. I look forward to spending time with myself. And I'm way more optimistic. about the future despite all of the things I've experienced in the past. And I have way more grace with myself and other people and way more empathy for men and like people I just never thought I'd be able to have empathy for. Like once you start to notice, because it will kind of just happen slowly over time, but you'll start to notice like, wow, I'm changing. I'm a different person. And I feel so much better. And it's not to say life is perfect. And it's not to say that everything's, gonna just be magically great. Like you're still gonna have challenges, but you're gonna know how to respond to it in such a different way. And it's gonna be so rewarding. So I just encourage you to do the work, the real work. Stop bypassing, stop fighting it, stop fighting yourself, stop avoiding it. Do the real work because the world right now, the world that we are living in, it really needs us to show up in our wholeness. It needs us to show up in our authenticity. It needs us to show up in our truth. We need to do this work not just so that we can live happier, healthier, more fulfilled lives, but because when we decide to choose ourselves, we are able to really show up in our wholeness, in our fullness. And when we can do that, the world is a better place. Imagine, just think about it. What would the world be like if every single person actually did the work? Because the types of people that are in power right now, types of people out there causing harm and wreaking havoc and harming innocent families and innocent people, imagine what the world would be like if they actually took the time to do the work. Imagine that person in the relationship that you resent or that relative that hurt you or whoever. Imagine if they took the time to actually do the work, right? Think about that. So you can't control anybody else, but you can control you. So if every single one of us holds ourselves accountable for doing the work and then align with the communities and the spaces and the people who are also doing the work, then we can make a difference. I truly believe that. And I think it's bigger than just for me anyway, healing is bigger than just doing it for myself, even though that's important because I love myself and I know that I deserve it. But I know that the world needs me in my fullness and I want to be a part of the good, the greater good, in whatever way that I can. And I've already experienced, being the one that's putting more harm and more pain out into the world, into the collective. And I don't want to do that anymore. So I'm choosing to hold myself accountable and take the steps needed to change, even if it's uncomfortable. And so I really encourage you, if you came across this and if you're listening up until now, to take that step, even if it's hard and even if it's uncomfortable, and know that you don't have to do it alone. There are people out there doing the work. And so if you feel isolated, if you feel like there aren't enough people around you who are actually holding themselves accountable and actually dedicated to doing that work, then I promise you there are people, spaces, communities, places where people are dedicated to it. And I am someone who's trying to build that. Me and a good friend of mine, we're trying to build spaces and offerings where people can connect with other people who are dedicated to evolving and healing and growing. And so just please know that we're out here and you are not alone and it's just worth it. Even if it's uncomfortable for the time, it's temporary. And once you get through it, you'll be so glad that you did that work. And again, you don't have to do it alone. There are people out there. So you got this. You got this, okay? We got this. We're gonna get through all of this, okay? This has been quite the year. This has been quite the year. Astrologically, socio-politically, just it's a lot. There's a lot going on. But we're gonna make it. I do believe that. I think that we need to do the work and we need to get very serious and then we need to come together. But we're gonna make it. And so, anyway, thank you if you've listened up until now. And I do encourage you to just stay connected with me, subscribe, follow all those things if you feel called to. No pressure. Whatever you feel is best for you is what I want you to do. And I will be back. And I am trying to be more active online, despite how I feel about that. Just because I feel like people do need to hear from those who are doing the work. They do. So I encourage you to check me out on Instagram. I have a Substack as well where I do some writing every now and again. I still plan to share resources and things there. So please go take a look at that. And until next time, bye.